Here's my take as a linguist on the differences between how Yoda speaks
Around the survivors, a perimeter create.
and how Yaddle speaks. Yaddle was first introduced in Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace, as a member of the Jedi High Council, and recently she featured prominently in an episode of the animated anthology series Tales of the Jedi. In this episode, she was voiced by Bryce Dallas Howard, and many fans were exposed to the fact that Yaddle speaks normally.
The wisdom of the council is to be cautious until we know more.
On a recent episode of the Force Center podcast, hosts Joseph Scrimshaw and Ken Knapsack answered a question about whether or not Yoda speaks in riddles in order to challenge his students to think more deeply about what he's saying. But I agree with them. I don't think Yoda would have intentionally spoken in riddles on the battlefield. So what is going on? The first thing we need to establish is that the language that is spoken by most characters within the Star Wars universe is called basic. And in our galaxy, languages evolve over time. If you consider American English versus British English, they started as one English hundreds of years ago, but they were separated by an ocean and they evolved, and now there are considerable differences between the two. That was just a few hundred years, so imagine how much basic could change over the course of Yoda's 900-year life. So, my first theory is that Yoda is speaking basic as it was spoken when he learned it. Unless Yoda spent tons of time devoting himself to trying to update his language, it would be really hard. Why wouldn't Yaddle speak that way? I think she's just younger. In fact, the puppet that was used for Yaddle was actually one of the first iterations created for Yoda in the prequels, but George Lucas said he thought it looked too young. So I think Yaddle just learned the language much more recently than Yoda did. A second possibility is that Yoda learned the language later in life than Yaddle did. Maybe the sentence structure that Yoda uses is the sentence structure of their native language. If Yoda had learned basic as an adult, whereas Yaddle learned it at a much younger age, Yoda's is going to be less precise. It's harder to learn a new language when you're an adult. So those are two possibilities. Either Yoda speaking the language as it was hundreds of years earlier, which is my personal headcanon, or he simply learned it later in life, so it's harder for him to make it perfect. But that's okay, because language doesn't have to be perfect to be understood. Keep that in mind. Be nice to your neighbors. And if you think of any other TV or film questions that a linguist might be able to answer, let me know.